Good late Thursday, early Friday. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving you a look at that Doppler perspective across the region. Don't see too much there, especially over the land areas. That's good news as we're monitoring the overall situation here. Definitely, just the overall storyline will be going from near record highs, some 80s here, maybe not quite getting to the records, generally as we're looking at things over the next few days, Friday, Saturday, and then it's part of it into Sunday there. But as we get into early next week, we're talking about the coldest year of the season, pretty much in some ways going from summer to winter here, folks. So just be prepared for that. I know you do see a small risk of some stronger, maybe even isolated severe storm in our northwestern counties today. I know that's not really the focus here. We'll watch it. There is a chance here that we could have a damaging wind gust, believe it or not. Even though the rain chance overall is pretty low. That's, sometimes we would be leading with that. I know sometimes these systems can't overachieve more than what the models are showing because it's going to be such a powerful temperature, drop here as we look ahead. That's really going to be, one that you just don't generally see so much here to go from, into the 80s to maybe below freezing here, and those wind chills in the 20s there by Veterans Day morning. Again, that's a big deal here. We don't generally see that big of a drop, especially on a day when people are going to be outside like Veterans Day. I know we do have the time change, which can help a little, and that the sun's come up a little bit earlier at least, so it'll warm up some. You'll have some of that warming, but it's going to be, one of the chillier Veterans Days we've ever had around here in terms of that morning low. I know we've had some chilly ones going in the past, thinking back, over the years, the decades here. Some of them have been really nice, but that morning low could be the coldest we've had in, the record books for the 11th of November here. So just be prepared for that. Again, that's a big deal. Severe threat here. Again, there is one, in play as we look toward northwestern counties. That's not that big of a deal, but we have to always watch it. That's your wind risk. That's your hail risk. There's not really a formal tornado risk. And then there is a general thunderstorm risk that goes from about Homerville, Waycross, and then Perry up to the north and west. Some of this will be more later in the day if we had it around here. You can see the marginal risk, across most of Alabama, a little bit of Georgia there, further up, and then Tennessee and Kentucky. There is a slight risk there in play. As we're looking up there, well, the wind risk doesn't go up, but the hail risk does, and this pattern, you see, it's pretty cool. But then there's also a tornado risk here from about just south of Birmingham all the way through Nashville there. So, you're going just in between there, Huntsville, and you see some of these spots in Tennessee, Tullahoma there, and up into Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then, just south of Lexington even. So we could have the isolated spin-up tornadoes not out of the question there in toward that spot, but that slight risk is for the hail concern there. You see some of these different spots, Lawrenceburg and Murfreesboro, and the Middle Tennessee state in there. You have, of course, Cookeville, so Tennessee Tech are right on the edge of that. So just kind of giving you guys the idea on that national story again. We will have a little bit of that. That's, the overall pattern is going to be what's giving us that cooler air here. As we look ahead, I say cooler, really colder by Tuesday morning. Again, this is going to be a chill, in terms of the contrast, like what we haven't seen in a long time. Not trying to overhype this here. It's just to go from that, warm to that cold. It's going to be, something your body isn't used to here because it's going to be such a powerful system with those wind chills. You're feeling like the 80s and then you're going to feel like the 20s. So that's, a huge drop going from some heat index type values to wind chill values very quickly. That's something you don't see again around here. But the overall pattern with the jet stream there, I know this is something we just don't, generally see around here. We've had colder air before. It's going to kind of, catch people off guard if we're not careful. No, it's a holiday, in terms of school for some folks, work for some folks here. So that does help, but in that not quite as many people will be out right at the, really, crack of dawn there per se. But again, it's going to be a storyline where, folks for those Veterans Day, ceremonies and the like will have to be aware. You see the temperatures right now, they put those back on the map. Just to kind of reiterate that real quick here. Those are, pretty nice, really. We're going to have much cooler air to the north of us even as we're looking ahead. I know Like on Tuesday, though, there's going to be a Veterans Day ceremony in Stark at the Charles Saper Veterans Memorial Park at 10:30. It's going to be chilly for that. A Veterans Day ceremony, flag retirement ceremony. Setup is at 9, according to the American Legion Post 56 there, Jones Langford White, American Legion Post 56. And it just want you guys to know it's going to be very chilly. Wear those jackets. I don't know, what the plans are there in terms of like a tent or something. There could be some wind too, so be careful. We don't want, tend to be blowing around too much as we're looking at things, tracking things here. It'll already be, chilly, so we're not expecting rain or anything like that. It's going to be a blue sky situation, it looks like, in terms of that. So that's something just to be thinking about. Not sure if you need a tent necessarily in terms of, Veterans Day ceremonies here, because it's going to already be blustery out there, blowing that around, and you don't really need shade. You want as much sunshine as possible. It's going to be chilly Tuesday morning. Again, can't emphasize that enough. We have our logo, with those red, white, and blue colors there for Veterans Day ahead. It's very important to honor all those veterans who served, and it's going to be chilly, very chilly. Again, this is, could be the coldest Veterans Day morning we've had here in the record books that date back into the 1800s. So, Veterans Day, I mean, that has over the decades been moved around, I believe. I should know that off the top of my head, here as we're looking at things. Yeah, 1954 is when it was established here. So, as we're looking, it used to be Armistice Day and the like. So, but, just that 11th of November, it's, going to be, even going back before it was called Veterans Day. Something that you just got to really be, really aware of here as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. It's going to be very chilly, much cooler than what you're seeing here. In fact, I know we, kind of in a way have a lot to get to, in a way we don't. I know Bradford High School, their playoff run starts next week. That's how it is in Florida here. I don't really know what the weather's going to be for that at this point in time as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. I believe it's Avon Park is who's coming up here to play the Bradford County High School Tornadoes. So we'll have more of that next week. We'll be watching the weather up north for like FSU Clemson, Kentucky game against Florida, Houston game that can be inside if they wanted to be, the Jags out in Houston. So no local graphics for those games because none of those are local. But you see this temperature forecast here. So we have 60s there. This is going to be in the yellow for Saturday morning. On here, I'm going to zoom out. You see some of that cool air off to the north. You see some lightning. You saw it there for a split second up here. I mean, that's a sign of things to come. I'm going to take that off, though. And then let me go ahead here and kind of continue to progress this here just a little bit. As we're watching, as we're tracking things, you can see this is that Saturday. You saw some of those reds in Florida, into the 80s there. And then as we get into Ward, that 10th there, though, we're going to jump ahead some. You start to see some of that cool air start to come into play. So just be prepared for that as we're looking ahead into Ward the timeline here. So that is your Monday. This is your Monday morning. You see some 40s in Georgia there. In those greens, our South Georgia counties, those will be in the 40s there, in the darker greens, 50s, and the lighter greens. Some of those 40s get all the way down into Florida. You see, though, as you're looking there in the blues, that's 20s there. I mean, and, the wind chill could be even cooler than that. I mean, you're talking about some of these areas in Missouri. They have a Veterans Park there, I know, and in Missouri, southeast Missouri, there around Perryville, and it's going to be chilly up there as we're looking ahead toward Veterans Day morning as well. As you see, we progress this. You can see there around the 7, 8 o'clock hour, give or take. I know the time changed. I gotta adjust my times here. 6 o'clock Central, I guess. In the 20s there, and some of those darker blues here on this. The lighter blues are 30s. And you see around here our area. So this is around sunrise on that Veterans Day morning. Let me go ahead and adjust this here to the view you used to see. And you see some of the dark blues. Those are indications of maybe getting down there, in towards some of those numbers that are, around freezing or even into the 20s there, past sunrise here. Those light blues are maybe right at freezing here, give or take, but there's going to be an increment in here, right before sunrise, and right before 7 a.m., which is, past sunrise now. We have a freezing, time frame potentially. So And maybe, overdoing the temperature a little. It could be even cooler, and this is what I'm saying. You got to be prepared. You got to bundle up here Tuesday morning. This is a big deal, in terms of this chill coming in here. I mean, we're talking about into Orlando in the 40s. That's not, damaging like a freeze or a frost could be. I know if the wind's up, maybe you don't have as much of a frost. We'll see. I mean, it could be just so cool there with the pattern. The freeze would be damaging. So just be prepared for some alerts to come out from the Weather Service for Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday morning. If the wind is down some for Wednesday morning, you might not have as much of a wind chill, for kids when they're going to school. And, it might not feel quite as cold, but the air temperature could be about the same. And that frost and freeze, the frost when you're above freeze, and that could be more prevalent here in terms of the wind not being as hot. That could be more prevalent because you can have that form easier when the wind is lower. So be aware of that. I know we're going to have some clear skies in some of these instances, but you see, Tuesday morning here, folks, we're talking about all the way down here towards southwest Florida in November, before Thanksgiving, or quite a bit before Thanksgiving. Naples in the 40s, Cape Coral in the 40s here, upper 40s, but still, Bradenton, upper 40s, Tampa in the mid 40s, some 30s, even getting all the way down towards Zephyrhills Hills and Brooksville. We're talking about on the 11th of November here, folks. This just doesn't happen very often. I know you're watching from up north, you're saying we get, a 10 below wind chill here, a lot isn't anything. I mean, this is scorch weather. Some people up north might say, but for us, this is a big deal here. This is not something you see. We're not expecting snow or sleet or ice or freezing rain or anything like that. But this, temperature drop is one of the bigger ones I can remember in a while, especially on a holiday when people could be outside. You need to wear jackets. You need to bundle up. You need to be prepared. It isn't like, it's not like a hard freeze, for many folks. Maybe in Georgia, a few spots get a hard freeze, Tuesday or Wednesday, but it's not something here that's a pipe bursting type of weather at this point. It doesn't look like for our local counties, but this is a freeze, and a frost concern, a wind chill concern, like what we don't get very often. So you got to be really prepared here for this because it's such a big difference. You can get this maybe in other parts of the country. We don't generally get this in North Central Florida before Thanksgiving on Veterans Day. I mean, this is, something where people have to be, prepared. I know there's a lot of stuff going on Tuesday to honor the veterans, and it's not going to be stormy, not going to have severe weather locally. You can be out and about. Once you get in the afternoon, I mean, the winds might be dying down a little and you have the sun out, it might not be that bad. But in the morning, it's going to be a chill like we haven't seen in many months. So, it could be something that, folks, the elderly, they could be more susceptible to these core conditions. You got to protect, those folks there, those people, got to be protecting your pets, your plants there potentially, not necessarily the pipes for most of us, but again, you see these light blue values here in the 30s, but the dark blue could indicate, at least get in the upper 20s. Some of these contours don't quite say that, but just based on what I'm seeing, even if not the wind chill, it's going to be breezy, bluster. We could have gusts 15 miles an hour there in the morning hours. I mean, at sunrise even. So it's going to be wind chill values that you just are, not used to talking about. Now, in terms of that in early to mid-November, I mean, again, it's just kind of a chill, going from the 80s to the 30s and 20s even. You just don't see that very often. I just want you guys to be prepared as we're looking at things and as we're tracking them. Now, I do want to go to the high-res model there, loading some of this on in because we need to show you some of this for storm potential. I know I don't want to see a blank map too long. There's your hail risk. You do have a risk of some stronger storms. It's not very high. That's your HRRR showing the temperatures in the 80s, some spots today in the red. That's even later on, and that's, let's see, 21Z. So doing the time conversions now, switch these around. So that's 4 o'clock Eastern. That's warm, that time of day. But now the base reflectivity is what I want to see here with the rainfall. And we could have some showers trying to come in up to the north. There's could be more concern in Tennessee. There, Middle Tennessee, Southern Tennessee, that area, give or take a little bit. I mean, you'll see here if I pull up the hail threat, and even to Kentucky, you got to be watching for that, obviously. So we'll throw that up there. I'll scrub back a little bit here so you can see the genesis a little bit more. This is, getting late morning, give or take, as we're looking. But then you progress it, go forward again in time, and you can kind of see some of this. You see some storms. This is, the latest one. I haven't seen this one, the 6Z here, but You see some stuff in southeast Alabama. Some of these could have at least isolated stuff, could rotate a little bit. This is at 0Z, so again, the time just changed. Our first update since the time change here. So 1Z was 9 o'clock here, Eastern before. Now 1Z is 8 o'clock as we're looking at things. But in the central time, it'd be 7 o'clock. So 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. And you see maybe some of that trying to hold together into our southwestern Georgia zones. You know, you see some of that breaking up eventually there, and then you get into the overnight, and you see some stuff, if you broaden the view here, coming in from around the Atlanta area. And we'll have to watch on that Saturday here. You see some stuff in the early morning hours. Your hail or wind damaging wind gusts can't completely be ruled out, but it's not a very big risk, you know, at all. I mean, this is one maybe a little more convexing than some of the runs I had seen, but let's get you to about the lunch hour on Saturday. We'll have to watch Saturday, Sunday, you know, it's, you know, into the day. Even for an isolated stronger storm, again, it'll be really hit and miss, though, even with the rain, which we really desperately need. I do see there's no formal risk now other than Saturday. There was one at one point, kind of, I believe, yeah, hinting into some of our areas here that's been taken off the board here as we're looking, but, you know, it could be some small hail in the deepest cores here as we're looking at some of this axe and some parts of the southeast here. So that'll be on Saturday, but on Friday, that's what we have. A formal risk, technically a formal risk, including a little bit of our area here. It's late Friday, though, again. And you go into Saturday, and then that's when it gets some more of us. And then Sunday, there's still, you know, through some storms. We're too far out of the models to get a good handle on that, probably. But, you know, this is going to be one of the runs. That's not going to go far enough out. So let's go to the GFS. And this is going to get in towards Sunday. You start to see a little bit more convection as we have the boundary pushed through and is behind it. That's where you have the chilly air. That's Sunday evening there with some of that. So as you're looking, not the convective outlook behind it was, you know, of course, today. But okay, let's get to the graphics here. This is a big deal, folks. This is a big deal. You know, as we're looking and as you're tracking things. I know, you know, once we get into the heart of winter, this type of temperature, you know, reading information isn't as big of a deal because you're used to it. You know, it's not the coldest we're going to get all winter or anything like that. It's just the idea of just jumping right into the deep end of the pool here, or deeper into the pool here after you've not been in there. And it, you know, you're going in there, I guess head first, you could say. I don't know. Maybe not quite that dramatic, but you get what I'm saying here. As we look at those forecast lows for Tuesday morning, again, you're going to have wind chill values on the 20s. I mean, in many spots here, folks. I mean, I say in the 20s. Well, let me check a couple of my numbers here for our southwest Georgia counties. I've been focusing more, you know, in the north central Florida zones, but southwest Georgia, let's look at some of my forecast information real quick behind the scenes here. I know I'm jumping all around. There's a lot to get to with this temperature storyline. You know, it's such a big difference. I mean, you know, we have the wind chill concern, the freeze concern, but there's wind chills. You know, for like southwest Georgia, there's some of those could be in the upper teens. It could feel like the upper teens on Veterans Day morning, like around Albany, Leesburg, you know, Cuthbert, Georgia, somewhere around there. So be aware of that. But in the 20s is what it's going to feel like around here. You know, the wind's going to be up enough that could kind of, you know, limit the temperatures from getting as far down as they otherwise could. And then, you know, still a freeze threat, still some frost threat, but, you know, maybe, you know, not as bad as it could be. But you got to, this is the first one, folks. This is the first one of the season for most of us. We had a little bit of passy frost there as we were looking back, but this is the first one that's going to be damaging your plants if you don't protect them in most of our spots. I mean, maybe right at the coast, not so much, you know, East Coast or something like that, you know, but this is going to be a problem if you're not prepared for this. This is going to be something that really has an impact on your plants. You know, not your pipes, probably, you know, not your pipes here for 99% of us. I mean, I can't completely rule a cool spot, you know, that's already traditionally cold, you know, getting below 27 and you have a problem, but, you know, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about those plants, though, those pets, those people. We got to be prepared. This is going to happen. This is not when we're just kind of pressing it. We're going to actually get to it here. It looks like Tuesday morning, you know, for most of us, except right at the coast. St. Augustine, maybe not so much, but, you know, Palatka is right on the edge of Jacksonville, but still, you know, you see there's some concern, but Gainesville, Stark Lake City, that's where we gotta, you know, be alert. We could have some alerts here, freeze watches, you know, freeze warnings here. This is the first one. I know they've changed the criteria around. This gets a little confusing once you have the first one, but but this is going to be the first one. So this is, I think we'll still have the alerts come out for this as we look ahead, because this is such a big deal here. We could have winds gusting 15 miles an hour there at sunrise Tuesday morning on Veterans Day morning. So instead of, being this number, what it's going to feel like, it's going to feel like the mid-20s. Those flags are going to be blowing around there. It's going to be, not again, don't cancel your plans. I know it's just going to be impactful though here. It's not going to be damaging, unless something, you really have the wind. I mean, it can damage the flag, sure. But my point is, it's not going to be like damaging, as long as you're taking the proper precautions, everything's secured there properly, But this is going to be impactful weather for our local area. I mean, North Central Florida getting maybe below freezing with a wind chill factor in the 20s on the 11th of November. That's a surprise here. I mean, not. We've seen it in models for a few days or more, but it's just, that's not something you generally expect. We're talking about maybe record-breaking lows here Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday morning here as well, with the, winds, if they die down some, then that can kind of lend itself to actually getting things in more rural spots. The actual air temperature can punch down and kind of catch you off guard, but we'll see about that. It's a little bit further out here. The temperature may not be, to that point, but there's the tropics now. You can see we're not really too concerned right now, but still remain alert. Still a few weeks left here as we're looking at things and as you're tracking. Of course, Melissa's one that Jamaica will never forget. Just a catastrophe down there. Now, if you look, Noah, I believe they have some images you can pull up and look at some of the damage, interactive mapping, and the like here. Kingston not as bad as it could have been because the storm went to the western part of Jamaica. It was more rural, but there were communities devastated, and there were a lot of fatalities. So, got to keep them in our thoughts and prayers. You see Nestor, Olga there as we're looking, as you're tracking. Those are the next two names. If we get to them on the list here, of course, we can still use these names in December if we happen to have something pop up in December. Not that we're saying that we would by any stretch here at this point, but that's not out of the question here, as we're monitoring the overall weather picture here, but once you get into January, you use the next set of names in 2026, as you're looking at the Atlantic there, as we're tracking things, and on 26 there, so once you got to January 1st, if we happen to have something, we had that in 2016, I think the first name in 26 is Arthur. By the way, so that'd be your first name in 2026 as we're looking at, as you're tracking things, whether it's in January or May or June or April or whatever. That would be your first, name there as we're looking at the overall meteorological storyline as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So yeah, just important to be watching things here, important to be tracking things here, but we're not overly concerned at this point in time as we're giving you guys the very latest here on the weather situation. Again, we're just always trying to keep you guys informed on everything going on as we're looking at the overall storyline here within the meteorology. So, again, that's what we're kind of looking at there right now. Again, just these temperatures, what a story that's going to be, though, as we look ahead toward Tuesday morning. Again, just be prepared for that. That is something, again, that is going to be striking there in terms of that temperature contrast going down, over 50 degrees, over a 50-degree difference here. And we're giving you guys the very latest on all this here. As we're giving you guys everything you need to know here. Again, not pipes, but plants, people, pets. You got to be protecting those there for that Tuesday morning. Many of our neighborhoods here, again, be prepared. This is a big contrast, a big difference, and the different fairs are going on. During the day it will be cool, at night it'll be cool. The early sunsets here in terms of the, clock. So that's something you got to be bundled up for as well. I believe Tallahassee and Jacksonville both having the fairs right now, as I recall. So just, you gotta be prepared for this, this temperature contrast here. As we're looking at things and as we're tracking things, that is a prominent storyline as we're looking at the overall meteorological scenario here. Just gotta be weather aware with all that here in terms of that storyline. Again, just be paying attention to all that here as the situation does progress. So, and our next one will be late Tuesday, but we'll break if there's any severe weather as we look ahead in the days ahead here, as we give you guys the very latest on things. So, not a big deal here. Not a big deal in terms of, the severe potential at this point, though. So, but this cold air is going to be an issue as we're looking at things and as we're tracking them. As we look at another viewpoint here, just giving you a look at some of the overall mapping tools that we have at our disposal. You do see here, parts of northern Illinois right now getting into some lightning, central Illinois even, as we're looking here at this overall storyline. So that's kind of interesting to see. Not necessarily expecting severe weather up there, but severe weather is possible. West Virginia, southern Ohio, into Kentucky, Tennessee. You kind of get the idea as we're looking at things, as you're tracking things, and then you see areas like Louisville. They're right on the edge of the threat today, of course. To the south where they could have some stronger to severe storms, more than likely, versus in Louisville. But we've got to keep everybody in our thoughts and prayers impacted by that terrible, plane disaster there on Tuesday. Just an awful, awful sight there with the fatality numbers. That's such a concern, and folks not being accounted for, and the like. This an awful, awful situation there in northern Kentucky, having an impact here. You can see it on the Doppler radar when it happened, that plane disaster there on a Tuesday, as we're looking at things there, as we, watching the overall storylines. So, just important to always be mindful here of what we're dealing with in terms of all that, as we're just, just a terrible tragedy there. As we go ahead, though, and jump back over, talking about more tragedy here in the tropics, that preliminary information on Jamaica's, hurricane there with Melissa. Well, the numbers, they equate to what we're seeing on this graphic. And the top number, 185-mile-an-hour winds there, 1935, and that Labor Day hurricane. Same type of pressure so far as well. This wasn't a U.S. strike, sure, with this one around 90 years later, but just to give you an idea, it was worse based on what we're seeing right now in terms of the raw power of the winds, like a tornado, worse though than Camille and Andrew and Michael and Ian and the like, which tells you how bad that hurricane's wind power was, and the pressure, down in the 800 range, 892 when it was heading. That's just terrible. If it would have hit Kingston, there would have been more in terms of the population yet, but there's still a lot of population yet, with devastation in western Jamaica, southern and western especially, seeing some big time problems from Melissa just over a week ago. As we're looking over there, and as we're, just watching the overall scenario. Again, Melissa's not, on the maps anymore, became post-tropical a while ago now, but the impact, this damage and devastation will be remaining for a long time there in Jamaica. Some folks losing their life down there, so obviously that impact will never go away for, family and friends. As we go ahead and look at tropical climatology, chances really start going down for tropical development. Can't rule it out, even as cool as it's going to be. In 85 with Kate, we had a cool, period in there, and then we had the hurricane. So still can't rule things out. We're looking better and better. But still don't want to just completely write things off. The models longer range have not been all that, some of them anyway, have not been all that, reliable lately. So even if they're not selling stuff, or even if they are at points, you don't always, go full into them there. They're just not, quite onto it. I would think we're getting close to the threat being over, but we did have Nicole back in 22 at this time. We had Ada in 2020 around Veterans Day as well. And then Kate even later than that there, back in 85, it was, closer to Thanksgiving. And it's still the worst storm in, the record books going back since 1950. It was in 85 there for Leondo and Thomas and Grady and Colquitt and Tift counties, according to my assessment. That's the last, in terms of calendar dates to hit, the only November storm on this map here. As we're looking and as we're tracking things, Dora was a September scenario. As we're giving you guys the latest, Irma was September there. Matthew there was October. Michael there was October, as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things there. with the overall pattern. Helene was September. Alberto was July. So you kind of get the idea here as we're, we're wrapping things up, but we're not quite done yet with a notable potential threat anyway. But there's nothing in the modeling right now that's really catching my eye, and that's, great news, obviously. Drought monitor is not great news at all. We're very concerned about this in the meteorology community. We need rain. We're going to get a little maybe coming up. It's not going to be enough, probably. We could use, a few inches of rain from a weaker tropical system with not much of their impact, but we're not going to get that, it doesn't look like. We need rain badly. Tallahassee, Monticello, over toward Madison and Jasper, even parts of Columbia and Suwannee counties under extreme drought. But the latest information from, this drought monitor update here, this is not what you want to see. This is very concerning. I know Stark's under a moderate drought. Gainesville is too. As you get into Union, it starts to end in that severe drought. We got to get rain, because as we get into these winter months, here, if we don't get much rain in the spring, that's where you really could have problems. That's where you really could be, in a bad scenario with wind and not much rain and dry, grass that, went through frost and freeze and is dead, and you get some issues unless we get rain. We don't want too much because that causes flooding, of course. But we need some precip. We're going to have problems here with fires. I'm just telling you that right now. May want to try to be, just worrying and being, watchful of, and, taking action to maybe cut down on some of the shrubbery around your home, for instance. That could be, vulnerable to wildfire. I'm very concerned about this, as we go into the month ahead. Unless we get a bunch of rain, we're going to have issues. So let's go ahead. Just be prepared for that. You have a little bit of rain in the forecast. It's isn't enough by a long shot. But you see 1/10 of an inch here to 1/4 as we're looking, as we're watching here. And toward our area in the western counties, Stark, maybe 100th to 1/10. Some spots could get a little bit more, some spots won't get any. You see eastern Tennessee and parts of Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, some more rain. West Virginia up there, more precip in terms of totals there, and in terms of the values there. But, the interactive radar, not going to have a lot on it, but we'll have to watch for some stronger storm potential. Still, even though we're not going to have much rain, I can have lightning, concerns along with it here, that can trigger things in terms of fire. That's, something we'll have to be mindful of here. If the wind's up, that could be bad there in terms of that, if things set up the wrong way. This is Georgia Drought Monitor. It's not looking good either. You see a lot of red on here. That's an extreme drought. And, I don't mean to be all doom and gloom here, but this is very concerning. Now, we'll see in Texas, you don't want to have what happened there in July in the Hill Country, on July 4th, no less, where you had a bad drought, and all of a sudden you had the terrible flooding, and it just overran everywhere. The grounds are a little different out there. It's harder to get flash floods, like that here. But you don't want it all at once either, so it's a give and take. But we don't want, we don't want this drought to continue, because we're going to start getting exceptional, and you don't want to get there. I'm just telling you, this is very concerning. Waycross, over into Charlton County, and getting toward Valdosta, and you have, of course, Thomasville, and Cairo, and Bainbridge, and Moultrie. This drought is very concerning. You got to be prepared for that. And, see a little bit less further up, but our southern Georgia county is a big concern. We watch our 62 counties, of course, as we give you guys the very latest on all of that. I do want to see this. We're not expecting wintry precip, but I do want to get you in the mood for it here. I know we're jumping back and forth a lot. There's a lot to talk about. We didn't have a big Tuesday. It wasn't, we didn't really need to. We were off anyway, and it wasn't a big deal, but you're not going to expect snow flurries. This is kind of funny to say, though, because, we really could use, some wintry precip here in a way. That would help drought some and the like, if you don't get too much. We're not getting that, but I just want to get in a wintry mood here. And I feel like it here as we look ahead. We're not going to see this, I don't think, here as we're looking ahead. I'm not seeing much cloud cover in the forecast like for Tuesday morning, where if you had the precip, it would be possible, but we're not expecting precip at this point. We're not into the high-res models yet, but still, not expecting that. This is a fun graphic. This is people in Albany where they had all this snow, thinking, well, this is all you had there. It's nothing, compared to, their parts. But all these little white dots, I'm talking about the little white dots on here, folks. That's your tiny snow flurries we had there on that Wednesday. That's all we had. We got lucky to get that on the back side there as it was moving out. to be quite honest, there with the light up. I mean, we didn't even have to get that, to be quite honest. We got real lucky to get that here. And that was a sight. We had that the day after Christmas in 2010 as well, something similar. It's only 2 times here in 24 years or so, in this area that, seen that. That's all we've had here in that period that I've noted. But, not expecting that. Just, the little white dots, it's just gets you in that mood here. The little flurries, snow grains, I might call them here in meteorology. But okay, this is going to be an issue, though, with the cold and windy conditions, not the snow. But, this is going to be an issue here. Got to have the jackets, elderly folks. Got to be prepared for this. Maybe, be out in the sun as much as you can be to warm up to the wind chill factor isn't quite as striking, to you. Because at 7 a.m., 25 is what it's going to feel like there. This is more Stark is kind of the center point for this. I mean, coast to be warmer. Some spots to be even a little bit cooler than this, but you see 32 for the air temperature at 7 at 9, 35, the wind chill. That's what it's going to feel like with the wind there, gusty in the teens, with the actual miles per hour numbers. And you see 40 for the air temperature, but then by 10:30, 48 for the air temperature. That's when things like in Stark will be getting going at the Veterans Park. That, veteran ceremony there, but 43 is what it's going to feel like. Watch out for the wind there, that's still going to be up some even, it's going to also be as we're looking here, let me double check my information real quick. Just with this wind, got to be kind of careful. There's going to also be a flag retirement ceremony, so need to be careful of that wind a little bit here too. The tents, the flags, stuff will be blowing around some, so be aware of that. 48 there by noon. As you're looking at things with that wind chill, 52 with the air temperature though, and then your wind chill, 52 by 1:30. But that wind chill, that's making it feel a little bit cooler. 56 is the actual air temperature. I know I did some of these increments a little different since we had that ceremony at dark at 10:30. I want to give that time. But also gives us 7 a.m. low point time there, give or take maybe 1 degree cooler right there before the sun comes up. But you kind of get the idea. Sunrise there. I know today it's at 6:47 according to my weather station here on Stark. Sunset's around 5:37 p.m. So that's a big change because, the daylight there, in the morning now more so because of that time change going to standard time until, I guess it'd be March. So hopefully it changes better to the smoke alarms and weather radios to be prepared for that. As we're looking here, I know we have to go watch out for some fog potential. I see a statement from the Weather Service about that. That's for this morning now. We'll get to that here in a moment. Be aware of that. Not, that we're saying this for Tuesday or anything, but I haven't, really seen it in there. It's too far to go out anyway. But, you can, sometimes we get cool area and freezing fog. But that's not what we're really expecting at this point in time. But this morning we have some fog, but it's not freezing here this Friday morning, the 7th. This is the 11th here again. Jacket weather on Tuesday, November 11th. Cold and windy. It's going to be chilly. Be prepared for it here. The temperatures, air temperatures in white with the background and black with the numbers. And then in the gray is where I have the wind chill values added for the different times. So that factor making it, chillier. George Winterland instrumental and coming up with a heat index. Well, wind chill is kind of the opposite of that. It's how it, feels the wind versus the humidity. In the summer, we have in the summer, those heat alerts. Well, in the winter, you have wind chill alerts. They've changed the name of them some here. But you kind of get the idea, it's how it feels to you in the cold with the wind. We're still you're talking about that when you're up north. But we're going to have that here on Veterans Day, the 11th of November here with these wind chills in the 20s again. Veterans Park, just be aware of that. And the other ceremonies around, not just in Stark, but other places, it's going to be chilly. Very chilly, windy out there, cold, jacket weather, flags blowing around, tents blowing around, napkins, if there's, different things like that with food, free food, those could be blowing around. We're talking about just a lot of things potentially blowing around here with, just any type of paper, can be blowing around here. Pamphlets and the like here with this type of wind and cold and chilliness. Just be, very prepared. I know it's kind of like chilly weather, that kind of food. And when you see these values like this, again, very cold for the 11th of November. We're not used to this around here for sure. Now, speaking of Veterans Day here, I do want to take this time to honor those who served in the armed forces, including my late dad. He did pass away there last April 2024 at the age of 85. He was in the military a long time ago. Big age difference there between me and him, but the Air Force there, 58 to 62, he served for 4 years. He didn't have to there, and he did though because his dad had passed away. He was killed in an accident in World War II there in 1945. So, but he went in there for the Air Force for 4 years, and really something that is a big a period in his life, and serving down in the American Legion here as a post commander. He was a historian as well, over the years there at the post there in Stark, Post 56. So it's always got to remember those, including those who passed away that served in the armed forces. I know Memorial Day is more for those who are killed in accident, like his dad, my paternal grandfather there. But he lived a great life after this, of course. But as we're looking at things, but it's a picture of me and him back about a little over 10 years ago, at Disney World. Actually, the one time we went there, I was going back there in the timeline. But as we go ahead and look here, dense fog now, you can see dense fog advisory, hazardous driving conditions due to low visibility. Just to make sure we could have some of this here. We don't have it formally yet for this Friday morning. But we're tracking here with all the latest. There is that concern in Bradford and in Clay and Duval and Nassau and Baker, Union, Columbia, Hamilton, Suwannee counties there. You kind of get the idea, in the southeast Georgia as well. You see the statement saying at 9 a.m. they're concerned about this. Weather Service in Jackson just went out with this, saying that area observations, the nighttime infrared satellite imagery indicate that fog is expanding there across southeast Georgia and along the Interstate 10 corridor in the Suwannee Valley and portions of the inland northeast Florida area there. And we expect the Weather Service in Jackson does locally dense fog to expand in coverage as the pre-dawn and early morning hours progress, and dense fog advisories may become necessary for portions of our area towards sunrise. So motorists should remain alert for sudden changes in visibility during the early morning commute, especially on low spots in their marshes, rivers, creeks, or lakes. And fog is expected to dissipate there by the mid-morning hours, so by 9 a.m. But again, be prepared for some dense fog here. Could have a dense fog advisory for some of the following locations in and around like Live Oak or McClenny and or Lusty and Hilliard and Lake Butler, Stark, Jasper, Jennings, White Springs, Amelia City, Fernandina Beach, Yulee, Jacksonville, Orange Park, Green Cove Springs, Doctor's Inlet there, Middleburg, Ortega, Riverside, San Marco, Lake City, Normandy. Looking at the alphabetical list they put out here, just skipping some of the smaller communities, but Blackshear, Nahunta, St. Simons there, Homerville, Woodbine, Folkestone, St. George, Homeland, Stephen Foster State Park. So again, be prepared for this dense fog that can lead to accidents. Not going to be below freezing, no freezing fog or anything like that here today, but just regular fog here with the 40s, 50s on the board can be an issue. So temperature doesn't play a role really with that in terms of, different impacts, that different values, contrast can, but then causing it to happen. But, hazardous driving due to low visibility here. Be prepared here as we're tracking things out, as we're looking here, just look at that and be prepared for this dense fog on your Friday morning. So that's something to be watching out for sure, as we're giving you guys the very latest. I know we're on late here in the night, but we get these model runs in. The latest updates can help us out a little bit here to give you guys the very latest information. Whether you're watching live or, on demand here. If you're watching on demand, well, you might already be past the fog here this morning on this Friday morning here. And we're looking at things, and as we're tracking things here, it's 3:17 when we're on live. If you were watching later, but in the ward that Saturday, there could be some fog in the ward, south central, southwest ward, maybe even Tallahassee. So be prepared for that as we're tracking. And then looking at like the high-res modeling on a Saturday, there's a small chance of a shower up at Clemson for the FSU game up there on Saturday night, but I'm not too concerned about that. As we're looking, temperatures pretty reasonable up that way. And as we're just kind of giving you guys the latest on that, I know up in Kentucky, could be some showers around Lexington, pretty low chance of that too, but not zero. So keeping that in mind as we're looking and as we're tracking, just kind of, thinking about Lexington, not that, I mean, it's not going to be there, but in northern Indiana and Michigan, there's going to be some snow as we're, looking here northwest Ohio, even according to some of the high-res models. That really kind of, painting a little bit of that there as we're looking ahead in the timeline. It's getting to that time of, weather here in that, time of year for that as we're kind of giving you guys the very latest on that overall storyline. So, kind of interesting there as we're looking here and as we're tracking things. I know that Notre Dame Navy game Saturday night. I know Navy up there had a Veterans Day, and I'm not sure that's the exact reasoning for the timing, but South Bend, Indiana, Saturday night. Well, there could at least, be some cold rain, maybe not snow then. But, early Sunday morning, folks that are still in town from that could wake up to some snow on the ground based on the forecast. No snow here, fog here, cold here, frost here, freeze here, concerned, but not snow. As we look, though, toward the next graphics, you see college football. Speaking of all that, Notre Dame and the like, they're hosting Navy, as I alluded to there. And you do see that they're in my bracketing. I know, this is a tricky one in a way, but in a way it's not. I mean, mine aren't that far off, but the committee had in the actual top 12 here, per se, seeds. Right out, I have some of the ACC teams higher. I don't, Texas, I mean, they lost to Florida. They did not look good against Ohio State either. They've had struggles in other games with overtime in some games and close games, and they're not. They shouldn't be quite as high, close to the bracket. Otherwise, because as other teams, from the ACC like Louisville and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's way underrated. I mean, Haynes, Keene. I know they lost to NC State. Virginia did too, though. It was not counted as conference like Georgia Tech's was, which is weird, but it's how things are now with their conference realignment. They're in the same conference. All three of those teams are in the same conference, but the Virginia and NC State game was a non-conference game because they couldn't get them in the schedule otherwise because there wasn't enough room within the year. But anyway, Louisville, though, the quarterback there, doing a great job for them. Trying to keep the, winning streak going. They beat Miami, who lost again. In Louisville there, I mean, that quarterback, of course, transferring in there from Southern California as we're looking and as we're tracking things. Of course, we're talking about Miller Moss there. We're talking about Miller Moss for Louisville. Haynes Keene for Georgia Tech there. So some big names in terms of the ACC. Virginia, their quarterback there, of course, is, as we're looking at things, Chandler Morris there. And Pitt, I have them, in the picture a little bit now, as great as they've been playing. And their quarterback did really good against FSU. And his name is Mason Heinzel there. So, gotta be watching all those ACC quarterbacks and action. Carson Beck, though, from Miami's really struggled. Talked about him over the years a lot. He's from this area. He got to play for Georgia before Miami. As we're looking at things. And then CJ Carr there, Notre Dame. He's doing a great job leading them since their first early losses against Texas A&M Miami. He's really turned things around. They're starting out so young. And then Texas Tech, Baron Morton's back. You got to give them a lot of credit. They're number 7 right now. Huge game against BYU on Saturday. Georgia and Alabama, they had early losses, but Georgia to Alabama to FSU. Somehow. Their quarterback there for Alabama doing a great job, of course, as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. Ty Simpson, Ohio State, Julian Sayin, Indiana. It's all about that quarterback there, of course. Mendoza there as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. It's talking about Fernando Mendoza. Texas A&M, well, their quarterback's been impressive there with Marcel Reed. You have Georgia, of course, the quarterback for the Dogs there in 2025. Gunnar Stockton, someone who's been really loyal for Georgia. Got to give him credit for that. I mean, of course, the Alabama quarterbacks have been really loyal as well as we're looking at things in terms of Ty Simpson. And then, Ole Miss there, they've been team they had, a new quarterback after coming into the picture with an injury being involved. And then you have Memphis there, that group of 5 team per se, last champ. Technically, you have 2 of those enter. You can't really have none because you only have 4 power conferences. But that's kind of the storyline there. Utah's been looking pretty good. Their 2 losses to BYU and Texas Tech, so they're just out of the picture. Committee's pretty close to that. I mean, OU did lose to Texas. You gotta, talk about that, even though, Arch Manning, he's really struggled, to be quite honest. But, he's, put a little bit better here lately, so we'll see how that goes. As we're tracking things, I know as we're on so late, to just get the SBC day 3. We don't have a rest for day 2. We do have a rest for day 3, though, now, for a lot of our counties, in fact. So, this just came out in the last few minutes here, so I don't have it in a graphic form. We'll have to pull it up a different way here. This is why sometimes, otherwise we have to post this later. When we're on late like this, there is a, usefulness to it, with this format. Granted, I mean, sometimes people aren't watching until later on, but still, this can be useful here sometimes as we're looking and as we're tracking things. This is your day 3. I know it's kind of small here as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. But you see there, that dark green there on the board. That is a storyline. The SBC has that in play for a lot of those counties now. I mean, that's a lot of area under that. I don't necessarily know if we'll have a tornado risk or anything yet. I wouldn't think that, but you could just have something rotate, I suppose, there. Tallahassee, all the way through Stark, Jacksonville, and I won't put my mouse in there for all that, but you kind of get the idea. That's a risk there we have to be watching out for on Sunday now. So, a lot of South Florida, a lot of almost all of North Florida under that marginal 1 out of 5 risk there. So, just be remaining alert. If we spin up a tornado, tornado warning getting into your room away from windows. I know our 2, not that we'd have this, haven't seen this in the models. There's some rotational parameters. So if we get storms to develop, that can be an issue. But, not necessarily saying it'll be anything like this. But December 20 and December 21, Bradford County, we had a very low risk of severe weather. And we had tornadoes. You have 1 tornado's touchdown here. Not much of a heads up there. So it can happen in December, November, whatever that time of year. Not that much of a warning here, so just be, careful here as we're looking ahead toward that Sunday. Don't, let your guard down here as we're giving you guys the very latest on things. I want you guys to just be paying attention as we give you guys the latest. Again, be aware on Sunday, just in case, that we get some type of warning. It's probably more of a severe thunderstorm situation. I'm going to scroll down. This just came out, so I haven't read it, obviously, but, they're talking about major amplification here. I know you can't hardly read that, so let me take this off real quick. We'll pull that up. I know that's, not the same type of stuff. I want to make this a little bit bigger, so I need to do that off screen real quick. This came out in the last, literally here, it came out at 3:19, so this just came out here, and I'll pull it back up. So you can read this here. The SBC information for Sunday. North Florida to Southeast Virginia, major amplification of the eastern continental U.S. upper trough that commences on day 2 Saturday will persist through Sunday. Attendant surface cyclone should track there from the lower Great Lakes, upper Ohio Valley towards coastal southern New England through Sunday night. Extending south from this lower cold front will push east across the southeast and largely offshore by late evening north of the Florida Peninsula. And now while the bulk of the deep layer flow amplification will be behind the front according to this information from the Storm Prediction Center, a deep layer shear will be present along and ahead of it with at least weak surface-based buoyancy. And guidance continues to depict run-to-run inconsistency. We've had that a lot lately in some of the models, as I had some commentary, but some models trend upward with a degree of convective cover, but others indicate a fairly dry frontal passes in this region amid low relative humidity and weak lapse rates in the mid-levels. Like we had that tornado in Valdosta about a decade ago with no cloud, the ground lightning observed. There's no lightning observed really at all, and, it's have to be alert, in case things that are tricky here. But, there's a potential, but, as we're looking, but some of the guidance, GFS insistent, the parent DFS to GEFS there from 0 to Z, most insistent on greater than isolated convective coverage from Georgia northward, supportive of a 2, level type of rest, 2 out of 5 rest, a slight rest, but with other guidance trending in the opposite direction, or HRRR was, I was looking at earlier on, at least the 0 to Z was, those are for the later outlooks for potential upgrades. That's kind of a, big step there. Wasn't necessarily sure we'd get that because HRRR trended down earlier on, I only have 30% on my rain chance for Sunday. And Saturday, and that's probably about right. Even forget it, but a storm, because anything that develops in this pattern with some wind parameters could be strong or severe, even if we don't get much rain and storms. We need the rain. We don't need the storms. Probably not going to get much rain, but we could get some storms. I know that's how it kind of goes sometimes. So just be prepared for that. I know the grass, some of that's going to get killed here by the frost and the freeze coming up. So, that potential coming on up in toward the timeline. So you just got to be aware of that here as we're looking at things, as you're tracking things here with the overall storyline. We'll just be alert, If you get a warning, just be ready to take those precautions, even marginal risk all the way down to Orlando. But we'll be watching college football, a lot of those games on Saturday, and of course, if there's any weather warrants, we'll be watching that as well. And then as we get into that extended look at things here, that's the last graphic in this grouping. I didn't put strong storms in here based on what I saw, and today we have that really low risk. Honestly, that new risk now for Sunday tells me I might, it's not on here, but just think Sunday could have a stronger storm now with that margin risk covering so much of us. There's a lot of uncertainty. There might not be hardly anything. Only 30% rain. The coverage is very limited, but something that forms on Sunday, more so than anything, could be the day where you have more coalescence. You saw GFS, it's on more of a line. And there's some parameters in that, and you didn't have HRRR, which I looked at behind the scenes, from 0 to so much of anything. So it's tricky there. 30% we'll go with, but we could have about 30, 40% coverage, 20% coverage. The lower the coverage, if it's really low, maybe not. But if you're like 40% coverage in that Sunday, there we could end up having 1 or 2 of those storms turn severe or even rotate. So just be aware, Interior room away from windows is where you're going to tornado warning. Not really expecting that here at this point, but it's not impossible in this pattern. Stuff can just all of a sudden kind of catch you there, and you got to be prepared. Veterans Day, colder air coming in, very cold. That's been the storyline for this whole update, which has gone on for a while here, about an hour, because that cold air is going to really catch people off guard if we're not careful. The more storms you have of that line, then maybe it won't as much. You kind of realize it, even if you're not paying attention to the weather, but you go from 81 for the high on Sunday, 83 Saturday, to 57 for the high on Monday. At least I get you prepared. You see how cold it is. You know that something's up, and you'll check the weather, and you'll see maybe some alerts, frost advisories, freeze warnings in play for portions of our area. I don't know if we'll have any wind chill alerts, but still, it's going to be very much, feeling colder even than 31. It's going to feel like the 20s. Even in Southwest Georgia and Albany and Leesburg, and, up there in Quitman County, it could feel like the upper teens for that wind chill value. On that Veterans Day morning, very chilly. And then warming up, though, by Wednesday, a little bit in the day, but in the morning, temperature about the same if you don't have much wind, and that could allow more frost blast. Some rural spots could actually get colder than, like, the number I have for Veterans Day, which is a little weird. Some spots to be warmer, but in some spots with that wind dying down, it actually be rural spots, like maybe where I'm at here east of Stark, could be a little bit cooler. We'll see. You see that warm up some on Thursday, but still pretty cool. 41 in the morning, 74 in the afternoon. If you're watching live, it's 56 right now here east of Stark, this rural area, on this Friday morning. By Tuesday morning, we could have about 30, 31 here. Rural area, as we're looking at that gauge, that the wind's out, the wind chill much cooler. Wednesday morning, even though I have 32 here because it's a rural area and the winds are down, maybe Wednesday morning the air temperature could get on that gauge down to I know it's weird you see it like this, and because some areas will be warmer, but and some of the temperature forecasts were turning warmer, but if we stay about the same, the rural spots could get down to like 29 or 28 even. Wednesday morning, not impossible. So we'll see. Some of the temperature forecasts, it's on a big enough jump where it might not actually, and I factor that in some here, where it might not actually quite get there, as you just have the frost. Probably still have frost Wednesday, even if, Tuesday, more wind, temperature's cooler, it might not be as visible as Wednesday morning. We'll see. It depends on moisture levels and stuff too, but just something to be mindful of here. And the light, as gets further out, it's harder to forecast some of that, but just be prepared for all that. I think that's about it. We'll go ahead and start to wrap it up. Let me see if there's any questions or comments here from any of the viewers at home. Appreciate everybody tuning in here and trusting me on this, Friday morning here, late Thursday, early Friday, on all the different platforms, giving you guys the latest. Facebook, Casey Cloud WX, Facebook, Cloud Weather, Twitter /X at Cloud Casey, YouTube at Cloud Weather. You have Twitch Cloud Weather, you have cloudweather.com, the website. So Just giving you guys the very latest here. We'll break back in if we need to for any strong or severe. Really severe, not really strong probably, but if we have some warnings, we'll be breaking in for that. Otherwise, we'll be on late Tuesday, so no formal update before the, cold Veterans Day morning. We'll be on late Veterans Day night into Wednesday with an update. May have some more alert information for you. But Tuesday morning, that's when we're really gonna have to be alert here for these rapidly changing, temperatures going from, again, Sunday 81 to Veterans Day morning on average 31 here. Again, well below average. Maybe a record low here for Veterans Day morning with the wind chill values in the 20s. That's a huge push of cold air in the overall pattern. You don't see that very much around here this early end toward, not even mid-November yet. I mean, close to it, but not even that close to Thanksgiving. It's coming, but, still a little ways away. And, on the 11th of November, we could have a very chilly morning here in North Florida again. This is, not necessarily a sign that we're going to have a cold winter. I think we're going to have a dry winter, which is a concern. But just be prepared here with the cold conditions in the morning. It's not like we haven't seen this. We had colder. Of course, we had the snow in January. Some areas much colder. But this right here, this cold, it's just something you haven't seen in a while to get, like this when people are outdoors on that Veterans Day, honoring those veterans there. You got to be aware. I see Judy there and Tucker watching. I appreciate you guys tuning in and trusting me. They are on YouTube with different folks tuning in the comments, talking about watching. Again, I appreciate everybody watching. I appreciate everybody trusting me. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Again, watch out for a stronger storm Saturday or Sunday. It's not impossible. Or even late Friday there. Nothing's really overly obvious. The rain chance isn't that high. But Sunday's the day, based on that newest marginal upgrade we've seen in the day 3 now. They don't have marginal in day 4, but day 3 now introduced that marginal 1 out of 5 for most of our counties. We could have a warning or two. Could have multiple warnings, or we might not have anything because the models are kind of split on that. So we'll be watching, we'll be tracking. Just watch out for Sunday. That could catch us off guard, but that Tuesday morning chill, we've talked about it a lot, more than we ever really talk about that. Just technically it's barely a freeze, but it's a notable situation because we're just dropping so much. 50-degree drop, a roller coaster. You start to warm back up there later on, but again, that's going to be a freeze or frost. Most of us there, and a little bit earlier than we generally have in the pattern. So make sure you're protecting those plants, those pets, for your folks there, your people, elderly folks, and children there, vulnerable, and the like. The pipe's not as big of a concern. Again, a cold spot or two could have an issue with those, but I'm not too concerned about those, luckily. Not quite getting to that level based on what I've seen in the latest modeling. That would really be an issue. You go all the way from, not any freezes to a hard freeze. We're not quite going to that, but it's going to be a legit freeze here coming up with, some of these values here on the readings and then the wind chill. It's going to be a legit cold fill in there Tuesday morning. That's maybe even a bigger story in a way. So be prepared for that. Happy Veterans Day. And just enjoy that weekend. Not quite an official holiday weekend since folks are going in on Monday. That's going to be raw out there. Wind will be an issue on Monday as well. May even be a little bit higher, on that Monday in a way during the day. I mean, we're not seeing the 30s during the day at night. Before Tuesday morning, you can have some issues with that. But, as we're tracking, I mean, let's talk about Monday night just real quick before I wrap it here. As we're tracking things, I mean, Monday during the day, you're going to have those winds gusting maybe 25 miles an hour around Stark, for instance. And then, by, let's say, 10 o'clock on that Monday night, you have 44, give or take, on the thermometer. Dew point's really low, how dry it is out there. A 21 dew point, but then look on Weather Services information for Jack's office. But then the wind chill at 38 because the winds could be gusting to 22 even late at night. I mean, that's something we don't generally, out of the northwest, there's colder winds coming in, gusty conditions. So, 44, 10 o'clock Monday night with an air temperature there, of that number of 44, but feels like 38 with a wind chill because we have wind gusting to 22 miles an hour. So inland, that's a lot of wind. This is like something more like, you see around Christmas in some instances, or at least Thanksgiving. This is not what you see. Again, it could be a record low for some of us, on Tuesday morning, more than likely. Some of the records are mid-30s, give or take, depending on where you are. We could have low 30s here, and even if we don't, have that, everywhere, the wind chill is going to be an issue. Don't have records for that, I don't believe, but, still, that's something we got to be aware of. enjoy things, stay safe, stay warm. One thunder roared, if we have a little bit of that, go indoors. If you have a warning, severe warning, go indoors. I mean, but as we're looking at but that cold, bundle up, have the jacket. They might need multiple layers if you're out and about. Tuesday morning, Veterans Day morning, that's going to be a chilly one. So just be aware of that. Stay safe, stay warm, stay cool. Literally stay cool here for some of these days here, the next few. And then it's about staying warm as we look ahead here, as we're watching things across the covered area here, as we're giving you guys the very latest on things, as we're tracking things here. It's about, literally staying warm here as we look ahead. So just that jacket weather here on that Veterans Day. Set a story, in the morning. That's really going to be prominent here. As you see on this graphic, the air temperature's on the right, wind chill's there in the middle. I mean, mid-20 wind chill around Stark. Some areas could be even colder, in the upper teens with the wind chill factor, that wind gust in there, blowing intense flags and stuff around. Just be careful with them. Don't necessarily need to cancel any plans as long as you're taking precautions, have things secured, better than maybe you normally would. Really be extra careful and you should be all right. Don't cancel your plans. We need to honor those veterans that said in a hurricane, like what we had with a tropical system, at least with Ada in 2020, we had Nicole in 2022 there around Veterans Day. And this isn't that, this isn't like what we had around Memorial Day in 2012 with Tropical Storm Beryl. It's not a tropical system. Don't cancel your plans, but be prepared. Make sure you're taking precautions. Bundle up. If somebody's really vulnerable, then maybe somebody that's really in a frail state, maybe they don't need to be out in that cold of air. But otherwise, just bundle up and you should be all right here. Those flags, whipping out there. Just be, a little more careful with those tents. I don't know if I really want to have those out unless they have some extra security on them, because you want to have that sun out anyway, that, warming feeling on that skin, to make things a little bit more pleasant for everybody to, enjoy there. Because once you have the jackets on, you have the sun out, it won't feel too bad. But if you have a tent up, it starts to make things feel a little bit, chillier out there. It's not about staying cool. Like some days, like Memorial Day, sometimes it's too hot and the sun's a pain. It's making you guys feel a little bit too warm out there. Instead, the sun, it'll help you feel just warm enough, and a tent could block that out. So just be prepared, be aware of all that. Have a great night. Happy Veterans Day. Stay safe.